The tension in the first-class lounge at LAX was thick enough to cut with a knife. A wealthy woman, draped in designer labels, sneered at a fellow passenger, completely unaware of who she was talking down to. The woman she had just insulted? None other than Sandra Bullock. And just when it seemed like the situation couldn't get any worse, Keanu Reeves walked in, and his reaction left everyone in the room stunned. If you love stories of karma, unexpected justice, and celebrity kindness, make sure to subscribe to the channel. You won't want to miss what happens next. The sleek, modern lounge was a sanctuary for the elite, polished floors, ambient lighting, and waiters gliding between plush leather seats, offering champagne and hors d'oeuvres. It was a place where the wealthy gathered before their flights, their conversations filled with business deals and luxury vacations. Seated near the large floor-to-ceiling windows, Sandra Bullock adjusted the sleeves of her simple yet elegant sweater. She wasn't flashy, wasn't dripping in diamonds like some of the other passengers in the lounge, but her grace and natural beauty made her stand out effortlessly. She sipped her coffee quietly, hoping to enjoy a peaceful wait before her flight to New York. Unfortunately, peace was about to be in short supply. A shrill voice cut through the soft hum of conversation. "Excuse me? You're in my seat." Sandra looked up to see a woman standing in front of her, a tall, impeccably dressed lady in a tailored white pantsuit. Her sharp, angular features were set in a look of pure condescension. Her jewelry, oversized and undoubtedly expensive, clinked as she impatiently adjusted the strap of her crocodile skin handbag. Sandra blinked, glancing around. The lounge wasn't assigned seating, it was first come, first served. "I'm sorry?" she asked politely. The woman sighed dramatically, as if dealing with a child. "This area is meant for first-class passengers. You do have a first-class ticket, don't you?" Sandra tilted her head, a small smile forming. "Yes, I do." The woman scoffed. "Well, that's surprising. No offense, but you don't really look like you belong here." A few people in the lounge turned their heads. Some were too caught up in their own business to care, but others, especially the ones who recognized Sandra, watched with increasing interest. Sandra took another sip of her coffee, unfazed. She had dealt with rude people before. It came with the territory. But the woman wasn't done. "You know," she continued, sitting down in the seat across from Sandra uninvited, "it's always a little strange when people who don't fit the part manage to get into spaces like these." She gave a tight, insincere smile. "What do you do? Lottery winner? Married well?" Sandra raised an eyebrow, setting her coffee down. The nerve of this woman was almost amusing. "Almost. I'm an actress," she replied simply. The woman's smirk didn't fade. "Oh, one of those struggling actresses who got lucky, huh? You should enjoy this while you can. These places aren't meant for, well, you know." A sharp silence settled between them. A few people shifted in their seats, sensing the brewing storm. Sandra exhaled slowly, debating whether to engage or let it go. But before she could decide, a deep, familiar voice broke through the tension. "Is there a problem here?" The woman turned, her expression shifting from smug superiority to wide-eyed disbelief. Standing just a few feet away, dressed casually in a black t-shirt, jeans, and a leather jacket, was Keanu Reeves. His dark eyes, usually kind and full of warmth, were locked onto the woman with an unreadable expression. And in that moment, everything changed. For a split second, the wealthy woman's face flickered with recognition. Keanu Reeves wasn't just any celebrity, he was Keanu Reeves. A living legend. A name synonymous with kindness, humility, and a rare kind of decency that Hollywood often lacked. But instead of backing down, she recovered quickly, straightening her shoulders and adjusting her designer blazer. "There's no problem," she said smoothly, flashing a tight-lipped smile. "I was just making conversation." Keanu didn't return the smile. Instead, he looked at Sandra, his gaze softening. "You okay?" Sandra gave a small shrug, clearly unbothered. "Oh, you know me. Just minding my business." Keanu nodded, then turned back to the woman, his expression unreadable. "Interesting conversation you were having," he said, his voice calm but edged with something quiet and dangerous. "Something about who belongs in first-class spaces?" The woman let out a forced laugh, waving a manicured hand dismissively. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. I was just curious about her background." She tilted her head, her eyes flicking between Keanu and Sandra. "Well, you two know each other?" Keanu didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled out the chair next to Sandra and sat down, his posture relaxed but his presence commanding. The air in the lounge seemed to shift around him. "You could say that," he finally replied, his lips curving into the ghost of a smile. "We've worked together a few times." Sandra smirked. "Oh yeah, here and there." A few of the other passengers in the lounge murmured among themselves. Some were already pulling out their phones, pretending to check emails but secretly recording what was unfolding. The woman's fingers tightened around the strap of her handbag. "Well," she sniffed, clearly uncomfortable. "I was just saying that these kinds of spaces are exclusive. It's about maintaining a certain standard, you understand." Keanu leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the table. "Oh, and what standard is that?"
The woman blinked. "Excuse me?"
"You seem really concerned with who deserves to be here," Keanu said, his voice smooth but sharp enough to cut. "What exactly is your criteria?" She let out a nervous laugh.
"Oh, come on.
"We all know how the world works. Certain people," she paused, gesturing vaguely toward Sandra, "just don't have the look of someone who belongs in luxury spaces." Keanu's expression darkened. A long silence stretched between them, and when he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but filled with weight. "You know what I've learned about luxury?" he asked, tilting his head. The woman hesitated. "What?" Keanu's eyes didn't leave hers. "It doesn't make someone better. It just makes them more comfortable." The lounge went eerily silent. The woman's confident posture faltered. I wasn't." Keanu didn't let her finish. "The problem isn't who looks like they belong," he continued, his tone firm but calm. "It's people who think they own these spaces. People who judge others based on clothes and assumptions." He sat back, crossing his arms. "That's not luxury. That's just insecurity dressed in designer labels." Sandra's lips twitched. She wasn't one to let people fight her battles, but watching Keanu completely dismantle this woman's entitled attitude with nothing but words? That was a first-class experience.
The woman's cheeks flushed.
She snapped her mouth shut, glancing around as she realized that half the lounge was watching her, some smirking, others recording. Keanu smiled now, but it wasn't a warm one.
"I'm curious.
How do you decide who's worthy of being here?"
The woman shifted uncomfortably.
I just meant that some people don't."
"Don't what?" Keanu pressed.
She swallowed hard, realizing there was no way out of the hole she had dug. Keanu let the silence hang before giving a small shrug.
"Funny.
I've traveled all over the world. Sat in private lounges, eaten at Michelin-star restaurants, stayed in the most expensive hotels."
He leaned in slightly. "And you know what?
The richest people in the room are never the ones pointing out who doesn't belong." The woman's lips parted, but no words came out. Sandra took a slow sip of her coffee. "Well, that was fun."
Keanu grinned.
"Well, I try." Just as the tension in the air reached its peak, a voice interrupted. "Excuse me, ma'am," a uniformed airport staff member said, stepping up to their table. "We've received a complaint about inappropriate behavior toward another guest." The woman's head snapped toward him.
"What? Who complained?"
The staff member's expression was unreadable. "Would you mind coming with me for a moment?" The color drained from her face. She looked around the lounge, quickly realizing that no one, absolutely no one, was coming to her defense. Sandra set her cup down and smiled up at the woman. "You know, these places are exclusive," she said sweetly. "They have standards, after all." Keanu bit back a laugh as the woman turned on her heel and stormed off, the airport staff member following closely behind. As soon as she was out of sight, the lounge let out a collective exhale.
A few people chuckled.
Someone actually clapped. Keanu turned to Sandra. "Sorry for interrupting your coffee." Sandra grinned.
"Oh, don't apologize.
That was definitely worth it." The two old friends clinked their cups together, and just like that, the moment passed, leaving behind nothing but a stunned lounge and a valuable lesson in humility. As the woman disappeared from the lounge, escorted by the airport staff, a hushed wave of amusement and admiration swept through the room. A few passengers exchanged glances, some shaking their heads, others smirking at how quickly the tables had turned. Keanu leaned back in his chair, stretching his arms slightly. "Well, that was an interesting way to spend a layover." Sandra chuckled. "You really have a talent for these situations."
Keanu smirked.
I just don't like bullies. A young woman sitting nearby, who had been pretending to scroll through her phone but was clearly watching the entire exchange, finally spoke up. That was amazing, she said, her voice filled with admiration. She was so rude, and she gestured with her hands as if mimicking an explosion. Completely shut her down without even raising your voice. Sandra grinned.
Yeah, he does that.
Keanu shrugged modestly. I just said what needed to be said. The woman's voice dropped to a whisper. You know someone was recording, right? That's definitely going viral. Sandra and Keanu exchanged amused glances.
Keanu chuckled.
Wouldn't be the first time. At that moment, an airport lounge attendant approached their table, looking slightly nervous. Mr. Reeves, Ms. Bullock, he said with a respectful nod. On behalf of the airline, I wanted to personally apologize for any unpleasantness you experienced today. Sandra raised an eyebrow.
Unpleasantness?
That's a very polite way of putting it. The attendant cleared his throat. Yes, well, we take these matters seriously. The passenger in question has been moved to another waiting area.
Keanu smiled.
That's good to hear. The attendant hesitated, then smiled.
Also, I
don't usually do this, but my wife is a huge fan of speed. If I go home without at least trying to get a selfie with you both, I might not be allowed back inside. Sandra laughed. Well, we can't have that, can we? Keanu gestured for the attendant to come closer.
Let's do it.
A quick selfie later, the attendant practically beamed.
Thank you both.
And, just so you know, you've got a lot of people in here who appreciate what just happened. Sandra winked. We aim to entertain. As the attendant left, a man in a business suit sitting a few seats away raised his glass toward Keanu in a silent toast. Respect, he said simply. Keanu nodded in acknowledgement, then turned back to Sandra.
How's the coffee, by the way?
Sandra picked up her cup and took a sip.
Oh, still warm.
Which, considering everything that just happened, is pretty impressive.
Keanu grinned.
A small victories. Just then, another airline staff member arrived, this time holding a tablet. Mr. Reeves, Ms. Bullock, we wanted to inform you that your flight is now boarding. We'd be happy to escort you to the gate whenever you're ready. Sandra sighed dramatically.
Ugh, do we have to go? Keanu smirked.
I mean, technically, we could stay and see if someone else wants to test their luck. Sandra pretended to consider.
Tempting.
But I think we should leave before someone challenges you to a philosophical debate about who deserves to breathe first-class air. Keanu stood up and grabbed his carry-on.
Fair enough.
As they made their way out of the lounge, a few people discreetly clapped, while others simply watched them go with admiration. The woman who had insulted Sandra had come into the lounge expecting to prove her superiority, but instead, she had walked away humiliated, while Keanu and Sandra had only grown in respect. As they reached the gate, Sandra shook her head in amusement. You know, people always talk about how nice you are, but they never mention that you have a very specific way of making people regret their life choices.
Keanu laughed.
I just believe in treating people with respect. If someone refuses to do that, well, sometimes they need a reminder. Sandra smiled. Remind me to always stay on your good side. Keanu gave her a playful nudge.
You're safe. For now.
With that, they handed their tickets to the flight attendant and stepped onto the plane, leaving behind yet another viral moment, one that would serve as a lesson in class, humility, and why you should never underestimate Keanu Reeves. As Keanu and Sandra settled into their first-class seats, the atmosphere was noticeably different from the lounge. The flight attendants greeted them with warm smiles, and other passengers, many of whom had witnessed the earlier confrontation, gave subtle nods of approval. Some looked like they wanted to say something, but no one wanted to be that person interrupting Keanu Reeves' peace. Sandra leaned back in her seat, adjusting her blanket. You know, I was kind of looking forward to another confrontation. Maybe someone would argue over the last glass of champagne.
Keanu smirked.
I think one viral moment per day is enough. Just then, a notification pinged on Sandra's phone. She glanced at it and let out a low whistle.
Oh boy.
The internet moves fast. Keanu raised an eyebrow.
Already?
Sandra turned the screen toward him, and sure enough, a video from a lounge was already making waves. Someone had captured the exact moment Keanu had stepped in to defend her, and the internet was eating it up. The title read, Keanu Reeves stuns everyone after rich woman tries to humiliate Sandra Bullock. Keanu sighed with amusement. I wonder how many people will suddenly be experts on airport etiquette. Sandra scrolled through the comments, laughing.
Oh, this is gold.
Listen to this one, Keanu just activated his John Wick mode in real life. That woman never stood a chance.
Keanu chuckled.
I prefer to call it politeness with consequences. Sandra kept scrolling. Here's another, Sandra handled that with class, but Keanu's stare alone probably made that woman rethink her entire existence. Keanu shook his head. The internet gives me too much credit. Sandra smirked. Nah, you just don't take enough credit. Meanwhile, across the aisle, a middle-aged man in a crisp navy suit leaned forward slightly. Excuse me, I don't mean to intrude, but I just have to say, that was one of the best things I've ever seen in an airport lounge. Keanu turned toward him, offering a polite nod.
Oh, appreciate that. The man smiled.
I run a consulting firm. I spend way too much time in airports, and I've seen way too many people act like that woman did. It's always satisfying when someone actually puts them in their place. Sandra tilted her head. I take it you don't believe in the just ignore them strategy?
The man chuckled.
Not when it enables entitlement. Some people need to be reminded that money doesn't equal manners. Keanu gave a slight nod.
Couldn't agree more.
As the conversation settled, a flight attendant approached with a nervous but excited expression. Mr. Reeves, Ms. Bullock, I just wanted to say I'm a huge fan. I promise I won't bother you during the flight, but, that moment in the lounge? Absolute perfection. Sandra grinned.
Oh? You caught that, huh? The attendant laughed.
Oh, everyone caught that. The entire staff has been talking about it.
Keanu smiled.
Well, thanks for the kind words. The flight attendant hesitated before adding, you know, that woman, the one who caused all the drama? She's actually on this flight. Sandra's eyes widened in disbelief. You're kidding. The attendant shook her head. Nope. She's in business class, though.
Not first.
Sandra leaned back and let out a dramatic sigh. Ah, how the mighty have fallen. Keanu smirked but said nothing.
The flight attendant grinned.
I just thought you'd like to know. Anyway, I'll let you enjoy your flight. As she walked away, Sandra nudged Keanu. You have to admit, that's funny. Keanu exhaled, shaking his head with amusement. It's a little funny. Sandra raised an eyebrow.
Just a little? Keanu smiled. Oh, all right. Maybe more than a little.
As the plane began to taxi down the runway, Sandra glanced at her phone one last time. The video had already amassed thousands of views, and it wasn't slowing down. She turned to Keanu. So, what's the over-under on this story making the news by the time we land?
Keanu thought for a moment.
I'd say it already has. Sandra laughed. At this rate, by the time we get off this plane, people are going to be reenacting it at airports across the country.
Keanu smirked.
Let's just hope I don't get a reputation as an airport vigilante. Sandra crossed her arms playfully. Oh no, you definitely already have that reputation. Keanu sighed dramatically.
Oh great.
Just what I needed. As the plane lifted off into the sky, leaving the chaos of the airport behind, Keanu leaned back and closed his eyes, content that, for once, justice had been served in the most unexpected of places. But little did he know, the real aftermath of his actions was only just beginning. By the time the plane reached cruising altitude, the internet had already turned Keanu's moment in the lounge into a full-blown viral sensation. Sandra refreshed her phone and let out a low whistle. A wow! 10 million views in 2 hours. Not bad for an impromptu act of heroism.
Keanu groaned.
Heroism is a bit much. Sandra smirked. Try telling them that. She turned the screen toward him, showing comment after comment of praise. Keanu Reeves proving once again that he's the nicest guy in Hollywood. But don't push him. That woman thought she was untouchable until Keanu activated boss mode. Protect Keanu and Sandra at all costs. The world needs them. Keanu shook his head, a small smile playing on his lips. The internet really has a way of making things bigger than they are. Sandra raised an eyebrow. You humiliated an entitled millionaire in public, stood up for a friend, and reminded the world that class isn't about money, it's about character. That is big. Keanu sighed in amusement. I was just doing what anyone should do. Sandra gave him a knowing look. That's why people love you. Just then, a familiar voice echoed from the aisle.
Excuse me. Excuse me. I need to speak to the flight attendant, immediately.
Sandra and Keanu turned their heads simultaneously. The rich woman from the lounge was causing yet another scene. A flight attendant rushed over, clearly trying to contain her frustration.
Ma'am, is there a problem?
The woman scoffed, gesturing wildly. Yes, there's a huge problem. That man, she pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at Keanu, completely humiliated me. And now I'm being harassed online because of it. Keanu barely blinked. I didn't post anything.
She huffed. Oh, please. Don't act innocent.
People are treating me like some kind of villain. I had to turn off my phone because of the harassment. My reputation is ruined. Sandra, sipping her champagne, raised an eyebrow. Funny, I thought our reputations were supposed to be the problem in the lounge. The woman turned her glare to Sandra.
Oh, don't be so smug.
You were perfectly fine letting him fight your battle for you. Sandra set her glass down. No, actually, I was perfectly fine watching you make a fool of yourself. The passengers around them stifled laughter. Even the flight attendant bit her lip to keep from smiling. The woman's face burned red. This is unbelievable. Do you have any idea who I am? Keanu finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. I think that's the problem. You're too busy making people know who you are instead of proving why you should matter. The entire first-class cabin went dead silent. The woman's mouth opened, then closed. Her face contorted as if she wanted to argue, but for the first time, she had nothing to say. The flight attendant stepped in, clearing her throat. Ma'am, if you continue to disrupt the flight, we'll have no choice but to report the disturbance when we land. The woman clenched her fists but, realizing she had no allies here, let out a sharp exhale and slumped back into her seat. Sandra grinned, turning to Keanu. You really are an airport vigilante.
Keanu sighed. Please don't start that. Too late.
By the time they landed, social media was ablaze with new clips from the flight. A new title began trending, Keanu Reeves humiliates entitled woman twice, this time in midair. Sandra couldn't stop laughing. You realize you're going to be asked about this in every interview for the next 5 years. Keanu shook his head in disbelief. That's great. I'll just start carrying a sign that says, be kind, or I'll call you out in public. As they exited the plane, a group of passengers discreetly applauded. The flight attendant from earlier passed them, whispering, thank you. That was legendary. Sandra nudged Keanu.
Oh, see?
You're a legend.
Keanu smirked.
I prefer politeness with consequences. As they walked toward baggage claim, Sandra checked her phone one last time. Wow, she said, shaking her head. Looks like someone finally figured out who she is. Turns out she's a CEO. A very rich, very powerful CEO. Keanu raised an eyebrow.
Think she'll try to retaliate?
Sandra grinned.
Maybe.
But if she does, she's going to learn something real fast. Keanu tilted his head. What's that? Sandra smirked. You don't mess with us. And with that, they walked out of the airport, leaving the chaos behind, except this time, the world had seen what real class looked like. And the internet would never let them forget it.